What if the kindest soul you know is not a victim, but a weapon waiting for its moment? What if their gentle nature is merely the sheath for a blade forged in silence and betrayal? Carl Jung unearthed a psychological process so profound, so dangerous, that it redefines the very nature of power. This is the story of when the empath finally breaks, and what is born from the pieces. In the quiet annals of the human psyche, there exists a figure both revered and misunderstood, a soul who navigates the world not through logic or ambition, but through the raw, unfiltered currents of emotion. This is the empath. To the world, their existence is defined by a gentle, almost sacrificial persona. They are the universal confidant, the keeper of secrets, the emotional shock absorber for their family, their friends, and often for complete strangers. Their very identity is woven from the threads of compassion. They feel the pain of others as a phantom limb, an ache in their own soul that demands to be soothed. This persona is not a deliberate deception. It is a survival mechanism born from a profound, innate sensitivity. They learn early in life that their own emotional equilibrium is inextricably linked to the harmony of their environment. To achieve peace for themselves, they must first become the peacemaker for everyone else. And so they become a living vessel for the unexpressed sorrows of the world. They absorb the unspoken rage of an alcoholic parent, the quiet desperation of a struggling friend, the narcissistic wounds of a manipulative partner. They are a psychological atlas, silently shouldering the emotional weight of their social sphere, believing this burden to be their sacred duty, their very purpose. But this constant absorption comes at a devastating cost. This is the veil of the persona, the surface-level experience of the empath's life, and it is a tragedy written in exhaustion. They are perpetually drained, their own psychic energy siphoned away to fuel the emotional needs of others. They find themselves in repeating patterns of relationships where they give everything and are left with nothing. They apologize for existing, for having needs, for taking up space. A deep, gnawing emptiness settles in their core, a void that no amount of external caregiving can fill. They often suffer from a chronic, inexplicable depression, a sorrow they mistake as a personal failing, a flaw in their own character, when it is, in fact, the logical symptom of a soul that has been perpetually outsourced. They become the wounded healer, so focused on tending to the injuries of others that they fail to see they are bleeding out themselves. This is the conventional state, the normal life for the unawakened empath, an existence of profound vulnerability, mistaken for a noble calling. But it was beneath this surface of gentle suffering that Carl Jung documented his most chilling and revolutionary discovery. He observed across dozens of these cases a pattern that defied all conventional understanding of victimhood. The empath was not merely a passive recipient of abuse. Their highly attuned psyche, the very instrument of their suffering, was simultaneously operating as a sophisticated, unconscious surveillance system. While their conscious mind, their persona, was busy making excuses, forgiving betrayals, and absorbing pain, their unconscious was meticulously recording everything. Every subtle lie, every manipulative tactic, every emotional inconsistency, every broken promise was being catalogued with what Jung described as a terrifying, surgical precision. The empath's sensitivity was not a weakness. It was an advanced form of pattern recognition, a tool of data collection operating at a level far beyond conscious awareness. Their mind was not a diary of a victim. It was the war room of a sleeping strategist. Within the subterranean archives of their psyche, a complete and flawless map was being drawn, a map of the emotional pathologies of everyone who had ever harmed them. They catalogued triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears with the dispassionate accuracy of an intelligence agency. They had unknowingly compiled a perfect psychological profile of their tormentors. This is the great, hidden dynamic that Jung saw. The empath's suffering is the very process by which they gather the intelligence needed for their eventual liberation. The endless cycle of pain is not meaningless. It is an education. The constant exposure to dysfunction teaches them, at the deepest level of their being, how human systems operate, both light and shadow. The breaking point, when it finally comes, is not a moment of collapse. It is the moment of activation. It is the moment the unconscious archivist has gathered sufficient evidence, the moment the sleeping strategist is awoken by a final, undeniable act of betrayal that makes continued self-deception impossible. The dam of the persona finally shatters, not from weakness, but from the immense pressure of the truth it has been holding back. This is the call from the depths, the realization that the pain is not a random affliction, but a signal pointing toward a vast, untapped power waiting to be claimed. For the sensitivity that the world calls weakness is, in fact, a weapon waiting to be forged. Comment, "I awaken my power," if you are ready to stop absorbing the chaos and start understanding it. Subscribe to witness what happens when the empath finally reaches their breaking point. To answer the call from the depths is to begin the most perilous of all expeditions, the mapping of one's own interior landscape. This is not a journey across familiar terrain, but a descent into a psychic wilderness that has been, until now, deliberately ignored. The first and most formidable territory to be charted is that which society has taught the empath to fear most, the region they have spent a lifetime disowning. It is the realm of the shadow. In Jungian thought, the shadow is the repository for all that we repress, all that is incompatible with our chosen conscious attitude. For most, this contains the archetypal monsters, the greed, the rage, the envy. But the empath's shadow is a different kind of creature entirely. It is not a den of malevolence, but a forgotten kingdom of power. The empath's shadow is the silent archivist who never slept. It is the cold, clear-eyed general who watched every battle from a hidden command center while the conscious self was on the front lines, waving a white flag. It is the vast, unacknowledged intelligence that saw the truth with perfect clarity, even as the persona constructed elaborate justifications for abuse. Repressed within this shadow is not evil, but sovereignty. It contains the empath's untamed analytical mind, their capacity for ruthless discernment, their right to say no with the force of a collapsing mountain. It is the sacred anger that should have risen to defend them, the strength that was deemed too aggressive, the brilliance that was too intimidating. Society, and often family, conditions the sensitive child to believe these qualities are unlovable. And so the empath exiles their most potent tools for survival into the darkness, choosing instead the acceptable mask of perpetual gentleness. The work of this stage is not to vanquish the shadow, but to undertake a courageous act of reclamation. It is to walk into the psychic basement and recognize the formidable figure waiting there, not as an enemy, but as the disowned sovereign, the true ruler of the self. This compulsion to disown one's own power is explained by another critical feature on this interior map, the archetype of the wounded healer. The empath is almost always born from an early environment where their sensitivity was a liability, where their emotional needs were unmet, ignored, or even punished. This creates a core wound, a fundamental belief that they are unworthy of the same care they so freely give to others. This wound becomes the lens through which they see the world. It is the source of their profound empathy, but it is also a psychic magnet, gravitationally pulling them toward other broken people. They become obsessed with mending the fractures in others because it is a proxy for healing the chasm within themselves. In healing another, they receive a fleeting sense of worthiness, a temporary validation that quiets the pain of their own neglect. This archetypal pattern explains the tragic irony of the unawakened empath. They possess the precise tools to diagnose and heal emotional trauma, yet they consistently apply them externally, never turning that powerful gaze inward. They offer a lifeline to everyone who is drowning, all while failing to realize they are miles from their own shore. The journey deeper into the self marks the beginning of the end of this pattern. The integration is not a sudden event, but a dawning awareness, a series of unsettling moments where the unconscious strategist begins sending memos to the conscious mind. It begins as a quiet dissonance. The empath finds themselves finishing a manipulative partner's sentence in their head, predicting their next move with a chilling and unwelcome accuracy. A disingenuous smile from a colleague no longer inspires a need to please, but a cold physical sensation of revulsion, a visceral recognition of a falsehood. They start to hear not just what is said, but what is left unsaid, reading the emotional subtext of a room, as if it were written in bold letters. This dawning perception feels like a strange and foreign language they suddenly realize they have always understood. They don't know how they know these things, why they can anticipate a gaslighting tactic before it is fully formed, or why they can sense the hidden agenda behind a seemingly innocent question, but the knowing itself becomes undeniable. These are the first dispatches from the integrated shadow, the first moments the empath stops being a passive sponge for emotion and starts becoming a conscious interpreter of psychological data. The world around them has not changed, but the map they use to navigate it is being redrawn in real time, revealing the hidden currents, the treacherous shoals, and the safe harbors that were invisible before. They are beginning to see. And this newfound sight is the prelude to the crucible, the moment when seeing is no longer enough and a choice must finally be made. Every great psychological journey leads to a single terrifying moment, a point of no return where the old self must die for the new self to be born. This is the crucible of transformation. For the empath, this is not a gentle metamorphosis, but a seismic event, a volcanic eruption of truth that incinerates the carefully constructed world of the persona. This is the breaking point. It is rarely a gradual erosion of tolerance. More often, it is a singular, cataclysmic act of betrayal. It is the lie that is too brazen, the act of cruelty so profound, the final mask that slips to reveal a void of indifference where the empath believed there was love. This ultimate transgression acts as a catalyst, a psychological fulcrum that shifts the entire weight of their reality. The pain of this final wound is so absolute that it makes the continued comfort of illusion impossible. It is the fire that burns away every last excuse, every hopeful projection, every carefully tended fantasy. In that searing moment of clarity, the empath is finally forced to descend. They are plunged from the sunlit world of what they hoped was true into the cold, dark waters of what has always been. And it is here, in the abyss of their disillusionment, that they come face to face with their own shadow, not as a concept but as a living, breathing force. This is the central, agonizing confrontation. It is the moment the empath must look upon the complete, unedited archive of their own silent observations. The war room of the strategist is no longer a metaphor. It is the only room left. Here the evidence is laid bare, the lifetime of patterns, the encyclopedic knowledge of another's dysfunction, the precise and devastating understanding they have always possessed but refused to acknowledge. The confrontation with the shadow is the act of finally, irrevocably believing themselves. It is the acceptance that their intuition was never hysteria, their sensitivity was never a flaw, and their perception of reality was always the correct one. This is the most dangerous and pivotal moment in the empath's journey. To refuse this integration, to recoil from the truth of the shadow, and retreat back into the familiar prison of the persona, is to choose a living death. To ignore the shadow is to continue a life of psychic hemorrhage. The price of this ignorance is staggering. It is the perpetuation of self-sabotage, as the unconscious mind, armed with perfect intelligence, continues to engineer failures to protect the self from further harm in toxic environments. It is a lifetime of projection, seeing one's own disowned strength and anger in others, and then reacting with fear or appeasement. It is the curse of being a magnet for emotional predators, who can sense an unintegrated shadow from a mile away and recognize it as a boundless source of supply. It is a life lived in a state of constant low-grade anxiety, the psychic tension of a civil war raging just beneath the surface. To remain unawakened is to be a house divided against itself, a kingdom with a brilliant but exiled ruler, forever vulnerable to invasion. The reward for the courage to face this inner truth, however, is nothing short of apotheosis. The integration of the shadow is the recovery of a universe of lost psychic energy. Every ounce of power previously spent absorbing, processing, and neutralizing the toxicity of others is now reclaimed. This energy floods back into the empath's own system, not as chaotic rage, but as a cool, steady, and unshakable sense of self. This is the birth of psychological sovereignty. The empath no longer looks to others for validation or permission. Their own integrated perception becomes the final arbiter of truth. The result is a profound and almost unnerving calm. The external world, with all its chaos and demands, may remain the same, but the empath's relationship to it is fundamentally and permanently altered. They have undergone a radical shift in perspective. The emotional states of others are no longer contagious viruses to be caught, but data points to be observed. A person's anger is no longer a command for the empath to shrink, but a piece of information about that person's inner world. A manipulator's charm is no longer an intoxicating spell, but a transparent tactic to be noted and dismissed. What was once a trigger for an emotional reaction now becomes a source of strategic information. They have not become unfeeling, they have become untouchable. They have exchanged the porous, fragile identity of the victim for the diamond-hard clarity of the witness, a being who sees the world with perfect empathy, but from behind an impenetrable wall of self-knowledge. You have mapped the underworld and confronted the dragon of your own disowned power. Now, before we unveil the final form of the awakened self, ensure you are subscribed, for the ultimate wisdom is reserved for those who complete the journey. The crucible has cooled, the old persona has been reduced to ashes, and from that fire, a new being emerges. This is not the happy ending of a fairy tale, but something far more potent, the arrival of the individuated self. This is the synthesis, the state of being that exists after the war between sensitivity and strength has ended in union. The empath is no longer a casualty of their unconscious complexes, but a conscious, sovereign participant in the intricate dance of existence. This new reality is one of profound psychological wholeness. The internal civil war is over. The energy once expended on self-suppression and the management of others' emotions is now fully available, creating a state of deep inner stillness. This is the individual whom Jung called psychologically complete. They are no longer defined by their relationship to the pain of others. They are defined by their relationship to their own centered truth. They move through the world with a quiet authority that needs no announcement. The frantic need for external validation has vanished, replaced by an unshakable core of self-trust. They have not lost their softness, but it is now protected by an adamantine core of wisdom. They are both the open heart and the locked gate, the gentle healer and the fierce guardian, and they know precisely when to be which. This is not a state of perfection, but of integration, the capacity to hold the tension of opposites within oneself without being torn apart. They can be compassionate without being a doormat, vulnerable without being a victim, and powerful without being a tyrant. This internal reorganization inevitably triggers what I call the mirror effect, a phenomenon that Jung observed as the mysterious but undeniable power of the integrated psyche to restructure external reality. The awakened empath's very presence becomes a mirror in which others are forced to see their own reflections. Manipulators, narcissists, and inauthentic individuals find themselves profoundly uncomfortable in this new presence. Their usual tactics, guilt-tripping, gaslighting, pity plays, no longer find purchase. They are met not with the expected emotional reaction, but with a serene, unblinking clarity that offers them no psychic fuel. The empath's presence simply reflects the manipulator's own emptiness and desperation back at them, an experience so unsettling that they are naturally, almost magnetically, repelled. They retreat, not because the empath has attacked them, but because they cannot stand the reflection of their own shadow in the calm mirror of an integrated soul. Conversely, authentic, healthy, and self-aware individuals are drawn to the awakened empath. They recognize the resonance of integrity. They feel the safety and stability of a person who is fully at home within their own being. The empath's new state creates a field of coherence around them, a space where genuine connection can flourish and disingenuousness cannot survive. They do not need to cut people out of their life. The frequency of their being simply becomes incompatible with lower vibrational patterns. Their social circle transforms organically, not through painful severances, but through a natural sorting process dictated by resonance. They become a silent force for truth, compelling the systems they are part of to either elevate to their level of authenticity or to crumble under the weight of their own falsehoods. The final philosophical truth of the empath's journey is this: the ultimate goal is not the eradication of feeling, but the mastery of it. It is the evolution from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. The transformed empath becomes a selective empath. They can still feel the pain of the world, but they no longer drown in it. They choose where to direct their immense energetic and perceptive gifts. They can extend profound compassion to those who are genuinely suffering, while simultaneously identifying and deflecting those who merely seek to exploit their energy. Their love is no longer a desperate, unconditional offering to the undeserving. It becomes a precious, consciously bestowed gift. They learn to love themselves as fiercely and protectively as they once loved their abusers. The awakened empath, the figure Jung saw in his most chilling cases, represents a new stage of human evolution. They are living proof that true power is not the ability to control others, but the attainment of complete command over oneself. They are not less empathetic. They are perfectly empathetic. And that perfect empathy, when guided by integrated wisdom and unshakable boundaries, is the most formidable and transformative force in the universe.